The sun was setting over Pacific Sands, casting a warm glow on the picturesque town. Known for its peaceful beaches and high-end resorts, it was a popular destination for honeymooners looking for a romantic escape. Mary Evans and Jason Miller had chosen this serene town for their honeymoon, a perfect start to what everyone believed would be a beautiful life together. Mary was a 28-year-old kindergarten teacher who radiated kindness. Her friends adored her, and her family cherished her deeply. She had met Jason, a 32-year-old tech entrepreneur, at a wedding a year before, and their romance had bloomed quickly. To those who knew them, Mary and Jason were a match made in heaven. Their recent wedding was lavish, with friends and family traveling from all over to celebrate their love. The honeymoon suite at the luxurious Pacific Sands Resort had been decorated with white roses and candlelight to welcome the couple. As they checked in, Mary's face lit up with excitement. She imagined a week filled with love, laughter, and relaxation, away from their busy lives. For the first 2 days, they enjoyed the resort's amenities, lounging by the pool, dining on gourmet meals, and exploring the scenic coastline. They were seen laughing together by the hotel staff, holding hands as they strolled along the beach. It seemed like a fairy tale beginning, but by the 3rd day, things started to change. On that morning, the hotel staff noticed that the Do Not Disturb sign was still hanging on their suite door. Assuming the couple wanted privacy, they skipped the room. By afternoon, though, the sign was still there, and staff members began to worry. It was unusual for guests, especially honeymooners, to keep their room closed off for so long. When evening came, the housekeeping supervisor decided to knock, hoping to at least offer fresh towels. There was no response. After several more attempts to make contact, the staff, now concerned for the couple's safety, used an emergency key to enter the suite. What they found inside was beyond anything they could have expected. The room was dark with curtains drawn tight and a strange silence filling the air. As they stepped further in, the scene became horrifyingly clear. Mary lay on the bed, lifeless. Her once vibrant face was now pale, her neck bearing bruises that hinted at the violence that had taken place. There were signs of a struggle: a shattered mirror, overturned furniture, and a single bloodstain on the white sheets. Panic-stricken, the staff quickly called the authorities. Within minutes, the once tranquil Pacific Sands Resort was swarming with police officers, detectives, and forensic experts. The honeymoon suite, which had once symbolized joy and new beginnings, was now a crime scene. Jason was nowhere to be found. The news of Mary's death spread quickly. A young bride, dead on her honeymoon, with the groom mysteriously missing. The story immediately caught the attention of the media. News vans gathered outside the resort, reporters clamoring for details. Headlines the next morning blared: "Honeymoon tragedy, bride found dead, groom missing." The local police held a press conference, confirming that foul play was suspected and that they were actively looking for Jason Miller. "We are treating this as a serious investigation," the police spokesperson said, facing a throng of cameras. "We urge anyone with information on Mr. Miller's whereabouts to come forward." The tragic story captured the attention of people across the nation. How could such a perfect beginning end in such horror? Friends, family, and strangers alike were left wondering, what had really happened to Mary Evans on her honeymoon? The case was only beginning, and the Pacific Sands police knew they were dealing with more than just a simple disappearance. As the sun rose over Pacific Sands the day after Mary's body was discovered, the quiet town remained shaken, cloaked in an eerie stillness. Mary Evans and Jason Miller had been the embodiment of a fairy tale romance, and the idea that their honeymoon could end in tragedy was almost too much for the locals, and now the nation, to bear. Everyone was left with one pressing question: who was Jason Miller, and why had he vanished so suddenly? The investigation quickly expanded beyond the resort. Detectives started with the basics, digging into the lives of Mary and Jason, hoping that the answers would lie somewhere in their pasts. And what they found only deepened the mystery. Mary Evans had been adored by all who knew her. A California native, she was known as a gentle soul, with a natural warmth that put everyone at ease. Her life was simple but fulfilling, revolving around her job as a kindergarten teacher, her family, and a close-knit group of friends. Many described her as the type of person who remembered birthdays, always brought a dish to share at gatherings, and had a knack for bringing people together. Friends and family had been thrilled when she met Jason Miller, a man who seemed to share her values and had the kind of career that could secure her future. But as the detectives delved into Jason's background, a darker, more complicated picture began to emerge. Jason Miller was a successful tech entrepreneur with a charismatic personality that had initially drawn Mary in. He had built a small but profitable software company from scratch and had made a name for himself among Silicon Valley's elite. Outwardly, he appeared polished, confident, and charming. But behind closed doors, he had a different side, hidden from public view. Friends and colleagues who had known him well described him as intense, occasionally controlling, and fiercely competitive. A few hinted that Jason had a sharp temper, especially when things didn't go his way. Detectives learned that Jason's life had been marked by a string of failed relationships, all with similar patterns: brief periods of passion followed by jealousy and control, and ending abruptly when Jason felt slighted or betrayed. One former girlfriend had even filed a restraining order against him years earlier, though she later dropped it after he agreed to leave her life for good. Despite these warnings from his past, Jason had managed to maintain his successful image, keeping his troubled relationships hidden from public scrutiny. And then, detectives found Julia Park. Julia was a neighbor of Mary's, living just a few blocks from her family home. She was a striking woman with a confident demeanor, a single mother who worked in real estate. As the detectives interviewed Mary's family and friends, Julia's name came up unexpectedly in connection with Jason. Friends recalled how, shortly before his wedding, Jason had been seen spending time with Julia. Too much time, some would say. A few even speculated that he had confided in her during stressful times, but as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a far more troubling connection. Julia confessed under the weight of mounting evidence that she and Jason had been involved in an affair for months. She admitted that Jason had repeatedly told her he was uncertain about the wedding, torn between his growing attachment to her and his commitment to Mary. He had assured her that once the wedding was over, he would find a way out of his marriage without ruining his public image. Julia seemed stunned, even devastated, when she learned of Mary's death, claiming she had no idea things would go so far. But her involvement and the timeline of her relationship with Jason raised new suspicions. Beyond Jason's tangled relationships, another lead pointed to financial motives. Investigators discovered that Mary had changed her will just days before the wedding, leaving Jason as the primary beneficiary. It seemed odd, almost rushed. Mary was the cautious type, not one to make impulsive decisions, and the timing of the will revision left her friends uneasy. Friends and family, when interviewed, voiced surprise and concern. Some hadn't even known she'd made a will, let alone changed it in Jason's favor so close to the wedding. And then there was the trail of unusual purchases. Jason's bank records showed an unusual number of high-end purchases in the weeks leading up to the wedding, including a particularly expensive piece of jewelry and a series of large, unexplained withdrawals. But when detectives spoke to Mary's friends, they discovered that she had never mentioned receiving such gifts. Instead, it seemed that Jason had been spending lavishly on someone else. The detectives' eyes immediately turned back to Julia. But even as the pieces of Jason's life and motives were beginning to fit together, one critical question remained. Where had he gone? Detectives believed that Jason hadn't left the resort on a whim. His disappearance felt planned, almost calculated. In fact, the hotel staff remembered seeing him the morning after Mary's death. A local shopkeeper, when questioned, recalled Jason purchasing a few seemingly random items: rope, a flashlight, and a set of maps of the surrounding coast, just hours before Mary's body was found. Surveillance footage at the hotel even captured Jason slipping back into the suite at odd hours. But after that, his trail went cold. As news outlets caught wind of these findings, the media frenzy intensified. Reporters and news anchors spun Jason's disappearance into a high-stakes mystery, broadcasting details of the case across the nation. Photographs of Jason's calm, confident face were paired with captions like, "Where is the groom?" and "Honeymoon horror, husband on the run?" America was captivated, following each new revelation with morbid curiosity. Meanwhile, detectives worked day and night to untangle the final days of Jason and Mary's relationship. With each layer peeled back, the image of a fairy tale romance was shattered further, revealing a couple with secrets that ran deep. Mary, so full of optimism, had entered the marriage blinded by love, while Jason had harbored plans and resentments she would never know. And Julia, perhaps the only person who knew the real Jason, was left grappling with her role in the unfolding tragedy. By the end of their investigation into the couple's backgrounds, detectives had pieced together a chilling picture of betrayal, resentment, and greed. Jason's life, though successful on the surface, was rife with manipulation, control, and a desire to escape from anything that threatened his perfect image. The evidence suggested that Mary's death was not an accident, but a carefully orchestrated act by a man who had a lot to gain. But the case was far from over. The detective's next move would be to track down Jason himself, wherever he was hiding, and confront him with the tangled web of lies, deceit, and greed he'd left in his wake. At sunrise, the Pacific Sands resort glowed softly under the early light, a stark contrast to the nightmare that had unfolded the night before. The once serene honeymoon suite was now a sealed-off crime scene with police tape across the entrance, a grim reminder that tragedy had invaded paradise. Inside the suite, detectives meticulously examined every inch, looking for clues that would explain Mary's untimely death and the mysterious disappearance of her husband, Jason Miller. The air was thick with a strange mix of salty ocean breeze and the sterile smell of forensic chemicals as investigators in gloves and protective suits moved methodically through the space. The scene inside the room was chilling. Mary's body lay still on the bed, her once lively face now frozen in an expression that seemed a mix of shock and pain. The bruises around her neck hinted at the brutality of her final moments, and her hand was partially clenched, as if she had tried to fight back against her attacker. The bed linens were disheveled, with faint traces of blood on the pillow, suggesting she may have struggled before the end. Detectives noted the small, unsettling details that painted a picture of a horrific last night. A shattered mirror on the floor, as though it had been struck in anger. A single broken wine glass lay on the table near the bed, its stem twisted and sharp, as if someone had gripped it tightly before it broke. And, perhaps most eerie of all, Mary's wedding locket, a delicate silver piece she wore at her wedding, lay on the floor as though it had fallen off in the struggle. Beyond the physical signs of violence, the detectives couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling that the scene seemed almost staged. Despite the evidence of struggle, there was an unsettling tidiness to the room. Everything else remained in place. A book left neatly on the nightstand, the room's other furnishings undisturbed. It was as if someone had carefully decided what to leave in disarray and what to leave untouched, creating a chilling effect that left detectives on edge. The late investigator, Detective Caroline Hughes, had seen her share of homicides, but this one disturbed her in a way she couldn't explain. There was a calculated nature to it all, as though the person responsible had taken great care to create a specific narrative. Hughes observed the room, silently piecing together the events. The longer she looked, the more she felt that this wasn't a spontaneous act of passion. It was something planned, even rehearsed. The first breakthrough came as forensic experts dusted the room for prints and other trace evidence. They found a small, nearly invisible vial tucked in the drawer of the nightstand. Inside, remnants of a sedative were detected, a powerful sleep-inducing drug, one that would render anyone helpless in a matter of minutes. It was a vial that shouldn't have been there, something that didn't belong in a honeymoon suite. The detectives immediately questioned whether Mary had been drugged before her death, possibly incapacitated to prevent her from fighting back. Then, near the bed, they discovered faint but definite fingerprints on the broken wine glass. They matched the prints to Jason, confirming that he had been in the room at the time of the incident. But why would a newlywed husband drug his bride on their honeymoon? The implications were chilling, and Detective Hughes knew they were only scratching the surface of a much darker story. As they moved further into the investigation, they found Jason's phone discarded in the bathroom. It was locked, but once the forensic team managed to access it, a chilling array of messages and recent calls came to light. The last message he sent was to a number saved only as JP, Julia Park. In the message, he wrote, "It's done. I'll be there by morning." The words were simple, almost casual, but they hung heavily in the room, a confirmation that Jason's disappearance was not an accident. He had orchestrated every detail with an eerie calm. To deepen the sense of dread, the detectives made another unsettling discovery on his phone, a set of photographs of Mary, taken from strange angles while she was sleeping and dated over several months. Some were even from before the wedding. The implications were disturbing. These weren't the typical loving photos of a couple in love. They were detached, clinical, as though he had been studying her, watching her, perhaps planning this outcome all along. Outside the suite, a crowd of hotel staff and guests gathered, whispering nervously. Word had spread quickly about the events, and the atmosphere was tense, filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. As Detective Hughes and her team carried out evidence bags, they felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on them, watching every move, desperate for answers. But it wasn't until they interviewed the housekeeper who had discovered Mary's body that they began to sense the true horror of what had happened in that suite. The housekeeper, a middle-aged woman with years of experience at the resort, described a scene that still haunted her. She recounted entering the room and being struck by the sight of the "Do Not Disturb" sign that had been there for 2 days. She remembered thinking it was strange for honeymooners, but respecting their privacy, until the smell of something unnatural had pushed her to check the room. "Something felt wrong," she murmured, her eyes wide with lingering terror. "I've never seen anything like that before. I'll never forget it." As she left the suite, visibly shaken, Detective Hughes reflected on how the events of that night must have unfolded. The sedative in the drawer, the careful staging of the room, and the message to Julia Park all pointed to one disturbing truth. Jason had meticulously planned this moment. Every detail was calculated, from the drugging of his wife to the text message signaling his final chilling intent. The unsettling feeling grew deeper as detectives reviewed security footage from the resort. In the early hours of the morning, a figure matching Jason's description was seen leaving the resort through a back exit. He wore dark clothes blending into the shadows, with only the faint light from a distant street lamp catching his face for a brief second before he vanished. The timestamp on the footage aligned almost perfectly with the message he'd sent Julia. By the end of their analysis, it was clear that Jason had put considerable effort into avoiding detection. He'd likely chosen the back exit, knowing it would be harder for security to track his movements. It was also possible he'd researched the layout of the resort beforehand, a suspicion that only served to underscore the extent of his planning. Now, with the knowledge that Jason had planned his escape and had a hidden connection to Julia, the police knew they had stumbled upon something far more sinister than a simple crime of passion. The resort, once known for its tranquility, had become the epicenter of a haunting, cold-blooded murder. And with each piece of evidence they uncovered, it became more evident that Jason was not just fleeing the scene. He was fleeing justice, leaving a carefully orchestrated crime in his wake. As Detective Hughes stood in the suite, looking at the final remnants of the tragic honeymoon, she felt the weight of the case settling heavily on her shoulders. The evidence they had gathered so far told a disturbing story, but it was only the beginning. Jason Miller was out there, hiding somewhere, and Hughes knew that she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the full truth behind Mary's last moments. The hunt for Jason was officially underway, and with every step, they were getting closer to uncovering the horrifying depths of his betrayal and deception. The search for Jason Miller was in full swing, and as the investigation intensified, detectives turned their focus to the guests and staff at the Pacific Sands Resort. Each witness conversation brought them closer to reconstructing the fateful night that had turned a honeymoon suite into a crime scene. The first witness they documented was a neighboring guest, Linda Pierce, who had been staying in the suite next door. As a retired school principal, Linda recounted the sounds that had disturbed her sleep with unsettling clarity. She remembered hearing muffled voices through the walls, a woman's voice pleading softly but urgently, followed by an ominous thud that sounded like something heavy hitting the floor. The silence that followed convinced her it had been nothing more than a typical lover's quarrel, so she dismissed it. Only now did she realize the terrible mistake of her assumption. Linda's testimony added to the growing horror surrounding the case. Her account suggested a struggle, a final plea that was silenced, and a chilling end to what should have been a night of celebration. The detectives next spoke with a local shopkeeper who had seen Jason on the morning after Mary's death. The shopkeeper recalled that Jason had purchased seemingly innocuous items, a flashlight, a length of rope, and a map of the coastal hiking trails near Pacific Sands. In retrospect, the items raised questions about Jason's plans. The shopkeeper had noted Jason's calm demeanor that morning, as though nothing unusual had happened, in eerie contrast to the events that had unfolded. Jason's composed state suggested he hadn't been acting out of panic or impulsive rage. Rather, his actions seemed deliberate, as if he were following a plan he had crafted long before the wedding. The name Julia Park surfaced repeatedly as detectives collected witness statements. Julia, the neighbor from Mary's past, and the last person Jason had contacted before his disappearance, seemed to hold a pivotal role in the mystery. Investigators requested that she come in for questioning, hoping she could clarify her relationship with Jason and provide insight into his motives. Julia's demeanor during questioning was tense, a visible unease shadowing her expressions and body language. She admitted to knowing Jason for years, mentioning that they had met at a social event and kept in contact. Julia described how Jason had confided in her about feeling trapped in the relationship with Mary, how he felt pressured by her family's high expectations, and how he feared he couldn't live up to the life Mary envisioned. Her words implied a closer relationship, an intimacy beyond friendship. Julia acknowledged meeting Jason secretly several times in the weeks leading up to the wedding, yet insisted she had no knowledge of his plans. Despite her claim, her involvement felt undeniable. With signs pointing to complicity, she wasn't ready to confess. As the detectives gathered witness statements, a final testimony emerged, casting a shadow over Jason's seemingly perfect image. An old friend of Jason's, who had recently reconnected with him, recounted an unnerving conversation describing Jason's fascination with control and manipulation, and how he saw people as mere pawns if you knew which strings to pull. The friend shared how Jason had once boasted about manipulating an ex-girlfriend, making it seem as though she were to blame for their breakup. The friend's account painted Jason as someone who saw relationships as games to be played and people as tools to be controlled. Detectives listened carefully, connecting the testimony with what they were piecing together about Mary's death. Jason's calm demeanor in the shop, his carefully worded messages to Julia, and the details of the crime scene suggested his actions had been calculated, a controlled maneuver executed by someone who delighted in having the upper hand. Detective Caroline Hughes, closing her case file for the day, realized that the image of Jason Miller as the perfect groom had been shattered entirely. Each piece of evidence, from Julia's admissions to Linda's chilling memory of that final thud, revealed a darker story. Jason had not just planned his escape. He had orchestrated an entire narrative, a twisted act of control that turned Mary's death into his final play. The investigation would only grow darker from here, and the hunt for Jason Miller was far from over. With each new detail, the depth of his betrayal became more evident, and the detectives knew that finding him would be only the first step toward unraveling the horrors he had so meticulously planned. As the investigation deepened, the detectives began uncovering the twisted layers of Jason Miller's life. What initially seemed like a perfect match between Mary and Jason now appeared as a facade, concealing secrets that would shake the community to its core. Jason's past relationships were riddled with patterns of jealousy and control. He had cycled through numerous romantic relationships, each ending abruptly with tales of possessiveness, betrayal, and manipulation. One woman, an ex-girlfriend who had cut ties with Jason years ago, recalled that he had once staged an elaborate scheme to make her look like the villain in their breakup, tarnishing her reputation in their mutual circles. When detectives reached out to others from his past, they encountered similar stories, each laced with elements of deceit and possessiveness. Friends recalled Jason's need to dominate in every interaction, his refusal to let go until he had the last word, and his unsettling habit of seeing people as assets to be used. Then there was Julia Park. Julia's presence loomed larger with each discovery. Detectives confirmed that she and Jason had rekindled a connection well before the wedding, their meetings becoming increasingly frequent in the weeks leading up to it. Jason had presented a picture of a man torn between his obligation to Mary and his desire for freedom, portraying himself as a victim, someone who had been forced into a life he didn't want. Julia, despite her initial denials, had been complicit, aware of Jason's growing unhappiness and continuing to see him even as he stood on the verge of marriage. Further investigation revealed that Jason had frequently complained to Julia about feeling scrutinized by Mary's family, a source of insecurity that had festered for months. Her family's close-knit support of Mary and their reserved skepticism about Jason had created a palpable tension that he, in turn, weaponized as an excuse. In his mind, they saw him as unworthy, someone who would never measure up to their standards. He seemed almost fixated on this perception, crafting a narrative in which he was the oppressed, misunderstood outsider. As detectives pieced together this emerging profile, a potential financial motive came to light. Mary had revised her will just days before the wedding, designating Jason as her primary beneficiary. Those closest to Mary were blindsided by this revelation, having no idea she had even created a will, let alone one that included Jason so prominently. Her family and friends were stunned. Mary was the cautious type, not known to make impulsive decisions, especially concerning her future. For her to adjust her will in such a way seemed entirely out of character. The deeper detectives looked, the more unsettling details emerged. Jason's bank records revealed several high-end purchases made in the months leading up to the wedding, items that Mary's friends insisted she had never received: expensive jewelry, luxury handbags, and lavish gifts that clearly weren't meant for her. The records included a series of unexplained withdrawals and a particularly large payment to an unknown account just a week before the wedding. Detectives suspected the recipient was Julia, though she vehemently denied any financial involvement, claiming Jason's only gift to her had been his time and attention. With each new piece of information, Jason's motives became clearer. His life was a carefully curated performance, with Mary's money and social connections as his intended rewards. Her family's apparent disapproval had only fueled his desire to manipulate the situation to his advantage, feeding a twisted need to win over them. By marrying her, securing his place in her will, and positioning himself as the devoted husband, he would achieve both financial security and the satisfaction of proving himself superior to the family that doubted him. In a turn of events that only added to the darkness, detectives uncovered a recorded message on Jason's laptop. In the audio file, Jason, sounding unusually calm, recited what appeared to be a letter. He spoke about feeling trapped, about love becoming a prison, and about how he couldn't breathe under the weight of expectations that Mary's family had placed upon him. The letter, full of self-pity and thinly veiled bitterness, painted him as a victim trapped by a life he never wanted, unable to escape the clutches of a perfect marriage that he saw as a gilded cage. This audio file confirmed what detectives had suspected all along. Jason had spent months rationalizing his actions, justifying every step with a narrative that framed himself as the wronged party. And then came the final discovery, one that would forever change how those closest to Mary saw Jason. In the days before the wedding, Jason had met with an attorney, requesting information on marital asset protection laws. He had inquired about the inheritance rights of a surviving spouse and asked specific questions about legal access to assets in the event of a spouse's sudden death. The attorney, recalling the odd specificity of Jason's questions, noted that Jason had seemed particularly interested in how quickly such assets could be transferred. With this new revelation, the detectives began to reconstruct the sequence of Jason's actions. His marriage to Mary wasn't just a romantic entanglement gone wrong. It was part of a calculated scheme. Jason had targeted her, established trust, exploited her love, and systematically set the stage for his escape. The recent update to her will, the high-value purchases, the account transfers, and now his interest in inheritance laws painted a damning picture. Jason's marriage was little more than a financial transaction, with Mary's love and life as collateral. The investigation confirmed what detectives had feared from the start. Mary's death was no crime of passion. It was a calculated act, orchestrated by a man who saw his bride as a stepping stone to wealth and revenge. Jason had meticulously woven a web around Mary, slowly tightening his grip until there was no way out for her. Detective Caroline Hughes reviewed these findings with a sense of somber urgency. Each discovery, each new layer of Jason's deception, reinforced the belief that Jason was not merely a fugitive. He was a ruthless manipulator, someone who viewed relationships as disposable, people as pawns, and love as leverage. There was no doubt in Hughes's mind that he was dangerous, and that finding him was imperative. The facade of a perfect marriage, built on lies and manipulation, had crumbled. The truth was now in stark view. Mary was the unwitting victim of a carefully orchestrated plot, her life sacrificed to Jason's insatiable ambition and need for control. The once idyllic resort, a symbol of paradise for honeymooners, had become the stage for a horror that would leave scars on all who knew the couple. With each piece of evidence, the detectives grew more determined to bring Jason to justice. Knowing that the story they were uncovering was only the beginning, the hunt for Jason Miller continued, and the depths of his betrayal and greed were far from fully revealed. The detectives shifted focus to intensify their investigation, zeroing in on witnesses and leads that could clarify Jason's motives and bring a sharper understanding of his final moments with Mary. Key to this was questioning Julia Park, the woman whose involvement with Jason had remained ambiguous and unresolved. Julia's demeanor during the interrogation was tense and uneasy, with subtle signs of agitation that seasoned detectives recognized immediately. Although she initially attempted to maintain her composure, Julia's responses hinted at deeper involvement. She admitted to having a close relationship with Jason that had extended beyond friendship, acknowledging that they had met secretly several times leading up to the wedding. According to her, Jason had confided in her about his reluctance to marry Mary, frequently complaining of feeling trapped by Mary's family expectations and the social standing she represented. When pressed about Jason's text message, "It's done. I'll be there by morning," Julia's expression changed, and she attempted to distance herself, claiming that she had no idea Jason was capable of such violence. She insisted that she believed he was merely going to leave Mary. But as the detectives probed further, her explanations became inconsistent, the details of her story shifting under scrutiny. Her evasiveness raised suspicions, painting her as more than just an innocent bystander. With Julia's connection established, the detectives moved on to reconstruct the events in the honeymoon suite. Witness accounts and evidence suggested a carefully planned act rather than an impulsive crime. Linda Pierce, the neighbor who had heard muffled sounds and a woman's desperate plea, filled in more pieces of the puzzle, describing a faint but steady thud, followed by silence. Linda's account of those last sounds solidified the detective's theory. Mary had likely been incapacitated, then silenced in a controlled, deliberate manner. Jason's calm, methodical approach to the crime mirrored his previous manipulative tendencies, but this time with deadly precision. Further analysis of the scene uncovered disturbing evidence on Mary's phone, found discarded in the bathroom. In it were a series of deleted messages, recently recovered by forensic experts, between Mary and Jason. The messages revealed rising tensions in their relationship, with Jason becoming more distant and defensive, and Mary expressing growing confusion and hurt. The language was measured and unemotional on Jason's end, contrasting with Mary's increasingly desperate attempts to understand his behavior. These digital traces painted a clear picture of psychological manipulation, with Jason seemingly orchestrating Mary's emotional isolation before his final act. Finally, detectives questioned an old friend of Jason's who described his long-standing obsession with control, manipulation, and revenge. The friend recounted Jason's cold detachment in relationships, viewing people as chess pieces in a game only he understood. This testimony, coupled with Julia's shaky responses and Linda's account of the final sounds, provided a comprehensive view of Jason's mind. By the end of the interrogations, the detectives had a clear, coherent picture. Jason's marriage to Mary was a calculated step toward financial gain and personal satisfaction, achieved through control and manipulation. With Julia as an unwitting accomplice, Jason had orchestrated a plan that relied on deception, financial schemes, and ultimately murder. As the pieces fell into place, the detectives prepared to bring in Julia on accessory charges. The walls were closing in on Jason's twisted plan, and now, with each new layer revealed, they knew his capture was only a matter of time. The investigation into Jason Miller's calculated betrayal was nearing its climax. With mounting evidence from witness statements, financial records, and Julia's uneasy involvement, detectives honed in on the final steps to capture him. Each piece of the puzzle pointed to a meticulously orchestrated scheme, one that had been months, if not years, in the making. Detectives began by reviewing every detail collected so far. The last messages between Jason and Julia, the financial transactions showing his extravagant purchases, and the deliberate staging of the honeymoon suite to disguise his true intentions. The clear pattern of manipulation and control left no doubt. Jason had been preparing for Mary's death well before they exchanged vows. This was no sudden crime of passion. It was the endgame of a calculated plan. The discovery of Jason's interest in inheritance laws just before the wedding became a pivotal point in the case. His visit to an attorney to inquire about spousal rights and access to assets in the event of his wife's death indicated foresight and intent, exposing his scheme to secure Mary's estate under the guise of marital commitment. This revelation shifted the narrative from a tragic accident to a premeditated crime, motivated by greed. Armed with a clearer picture of his motive, detectives expanded their search efforts to locate Jason. They scoured nearby towns, monitoring transportation hubs and possible routes he could have used to escape. As days passed with no sightings, detectives enlisted the help of federal agents to widen their reach, suspecting he may have tried to leave the state or even the country. However, a surprising break came from an unexpected source. A local informant, known for connections with individuals operating under the radar, came forward with a lead. He claimed to have seen a man matching Jason's description at a remote motel on the outskirts of town. According to the informant, Jason had been using an alias and paid in cash, keeping a low profile and avoiding interactions. The details aligned with Jason's known behaviors, and the detectives wasted no time in planning a raid. With their team assembled, the detectives arrived at the motel under the cover of night. The quiet location, shrouded in darkness, mirrored the ominous nature of the crime they were about to confront. Moving with precision, they surrounded the room where Jason was believed to be hiding. As the team breached the door, they found Jason alone, visibly weary and cornered. The expression on his face was one of resignation, as though he had expected this moment all along. In custody, Jason maintained a cold demeanor, his expression betraying no remorse. During questioning, he carefully deflected responsibility, claiming that he had only intended to leave Mary, not harm her. Yet, his explanations fell apart under the weight of the evidence. The financial records, his recorded message detailing his feelings of being trapped, and Julia's statement painted a damning portrait of a man who had taken calculated steps to eliminate his wife for his own gain. Pressed further, Jason finally admitted to planning his escape from the marriage, describing Mary as an obstacle to the life he wanted. His words were chillingly detached, revealing a complete lack of empathy or regret. Jason's confession confirmed the detective's suspicions. His love for Mary had never been genuine. She had simply been a means to an end, a pawn in his pursuit of wealth and independence. Detectives then turned their attention to Julia's role in the crime. The Though she maintained her innocence regarding Mary's murder, the evidence of her involvement as an accessory was undeniable. Julia's financial dealings with Jason, along with her presence at key moments in his life, suggested she had been complicit, whether knowingly or not. Ultimately, Julia accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Jason in exchange for a reduced sentence, securing her cooperation in the case against him. The trial was swift, with the prosecution laying out the carefully constructed timeline of Jason's manipulation, financial exploitation, and cold-blooded murder. They presented the chilling evidence from the crime scene, witness testimonies, and the damning inheritance paperwork. The defense attempted to argue that Jason had been mentally unstable, under emotional duress, but the calculated nature of his actions left little room for sympathy. The jury found Jason Miller guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing him to life without the possibility of parole. Julia, as an accessory, received a reduced sentence for her cooperation, though her reputation and life were forever tarnished. The case concluded, leaving the courtroom and the town of Pacific Sands in a somber state. The story of Mary's tragic death at the hands of the man she trusted became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the darkness that could lie hidden beneath a charming facade. In the aftermath, Mary's family found a quiet strength, honoring her memory and the love she had brought into their lives. The community of Pacific Sands slowly began to heal, though the scars of the case would linger as a solemn reminder of a paradise tarnished by betrayal. The hunt for justice had ended, but the impact of Jason Miller's betrayal left a lasting shadow, forever altering the lives of those who had come too close to his twisted game. The case of Jason Miller and Mary Evans serves as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lie hidden behind even the most seemingly perfect relationships. It underscores the dangers of unchecked greed, manipulation, and deceit, showing how these traits can transform love into a weapon and turn trust into tragedy. The story reveals the catastrophic consequences of using relationships for personal gain and the devastation left in the wake of betrayal. At its core, the case teaches a profound lesson about the importance of vigilance in relationships and the need to recognize warning signs before they spiral into harm. It also serves as a warning that genuine connections are built on honesty, empathy, and respect, not on manipulation and control. For the community of Pacific Sands and for those who followed the case, the tragedy of Mary's death became a lasting reminder of the importance of self-awareness and integrity in all human connections, reinforcing the idea that true love cannot thrive in the shadows of deception. The story has been edited to ensure personal privacy and security regarding names and locations. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe to see the latest and most thrilling family crime stories.